What you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences. And I've always sort of found you would see things that you would not automatically have come across.
Hello and welcome to the Parliamentary Review podcast, the podcast that revolves around leadership. I'm Jonathan White, and in each episode I'm joined by directors, CEOs, CFOs, government ministers, chairmen, presidents, maybe one day even the leader of the opposition. I promise, Mr. Corbyn, I won't ask what your position on Brexit is 9 times. I don't expect an answer. The aim is to discover who these people are, the people who get up each morning and make Britain work. We discuss everything from the future of the consumer market for the SUV to the Royal Navy's work in stopping drug smuggling in the Caribbean Sea. And of course, the innovation and success in the country that make it all worthwhile in the end. We also get their take on the current political and economic state of the country. Later on in this episode, you'll have the chance to hear our exclusive interview with Lord Pickles, the former Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government, Chairman of the Conservative Party, and of course current co-chairman of the Parliamentary Review. But for now, we're joined by Tony O'Reilly, the Managing Director of Brown McFarlane. Tony has worked in the steel industry for over 30 years, starting on the shop floor, rising to hold director positions at Tata UK before joining Brown McFarlane, bringing much experience to his role. The company itself was founded in 1888 and has been in family hands ever since. We discuss their history, future plans and investments, and the state of the market in more detail now. Tony, welcome.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us today. Now, it's been some months since the firm has been in the review. I think the listeners would love to know what you and the team have been up to since.
It's been a challenging 12 to 18 months for Brown McFarlane, but we've risen to that challenge. We've been busily investing and improving our offer in the market.
Excellent. Now, I know that we'll be coming on to the specifics of that a little bit later, but I think for now it might be a nice place to start with the fact that Brown McFarlane has quite an extraordinary history, both in terms of how it's developed in this country, but also overseas. Would you perhaps, and for the listeners that might not be aware of this, going over briefly a little bit of that history and how that history has had so much effect and impact on how you operate today?
Well, Brown McFarlane is a long-standing family business. It's 130 years old this year, so it was created in 1889. The business was started by Captain A.R. Brown, and he himself had an interesting history. He is one of the few non-Japanese people to be awarded the highest honour in Japan, which was the Order of the Rising Sun. He was awarded that for his work in supporting growth in Japan, specifically in shipbuilding. So the business was started really on the docks of the Clyde, supplying ships to Japan, and then sort of evolved over the years, supplying plate, specifically for shipbuilding, and then that has just evolved and evolved and evolved over time. It's got a long-standing history. Started in Scotland, latterly in Stoke-on-Trent, and has continued to invest, continued to move with the times, and align itself to the market.
Fantastic. And I think actually one of the key takeaways there is you said it's sort of a family-founded firm, and you maintain there a strong family-friendly atmosphere. I think it's safe to say. How have you found staff respond to this, and what are the positives that can bring to a firm like yours?
Well, so one of the real positives, as you said, it is still a family business. It still has family values. We still believe in treating people properly, and that doesn't just mean our employees, that's our customers and our suppliers as well. We're in the 5th generation of the Brown family, and they're still actively involved in the business today. So we've got Richard, who's the chairman of the business, and we've got Peter, who's the finance director. So they're still actively involved. There's still that family feel about the place. Even though we've grown and evolved over the years, we've still got those values.
Well, they're so important to retain, and it's impressive to do so. Now, as you've mentioned, obviously, the firm was there a long time before the common market, and it looks like you'll be there afterwards, and perhaps we'll touch on that in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But within that time, obviously, it would be completely natural for there to be ups and downs for the firm. But specifically now, a little over 10 years ago, the 2008 recession really did affect the business quite comprehensively. How did that change the company and indeed your order book? And how has it affected you in the last 10 years? What have you learned from that time, and what's the company done to move forward with success? No doubt that the recession had an effect on the business, as it had an effect on the industry. My view is the steel industry is always challenging. There's always something around the corner. And yes, the company has evolved. What we have done, and one of the great strengths of Brown McFarlane, is that we're involved in a lot of sectors. We're not just reliant on specific sectors for our revenue. So we work across, not only the traditional business of oil and gas, which the business did really well with. When that business deteriorated, we also got involved in pressure vessels and boilers, storage tanks, construction, yellow goods. Even latterly, we know we've got involved in nuclear and grown our stainless steel business. So we've got a very wide product range, the largest stock range of premium plate, certainly in the UK, and we've got that broad reach. So that has helped us. Any sector goes quiet, what we can do is we're not too reliant, so we can go into other sectors. Absolutely, and I think given the importance of that, the evolution you've had over the last 10 years or so, and you've already brought it up, but perhaps if we can talk specifically about some of the more recent investments the company has ventured into, and how that will shape the future of the company.
Yeah, our latest investment, and Brown McFarlane has a great history of reinvesting in the business. I think that's one of the keys to its longevity and its success. But our most recent investment is £2 million, and that is specifically on a laser machine to support the growth in our stainless steel business, and also in infrastructure. So we've upgraded all the infrastructure of the site. We've also gone down the green energy route, so we put solar panels on the roof, LED lighting.
Superb.
We put some new cranes up. Everything we've done, we've focused on increasing efficiency, reducing costs, trying to do things in the right way. But obviously the main thrust of what we're doing is putting a brand new laser machine in, which is the biggest of its kind in the UK. So it's a
Fantastic.
12 metre by 3 metre, 10 kilowatt fibre laser, which will enable us to cut, plates up to 12 metres long, 3 metres wide. And that's something that, our competitors simply can't do.
So a more productive and greener decade awaits Brown McFarlane going forward by the looks of it. An exciting time then for the company, but very positive from your end. But perhaps if we take a step back for a minute, Tony, and perhaps look at the sector more broadly, even those not involved with the sector will know that the story of British Steel hasn't been a happy one over the last few months and years. But with that in mind and looking at the sector, what would you say the biggest challenges you and the sector face in the medium term at the moment?
Well, I think I've said previously that there's always challenges in the steel industry. I've been involved in the steel industry for 35 years now, and there's always a challenge around the corner, whether that be political, whether it be rising prices, shortage of raw materials, unrest anywhere in the world can cause problems. It's an extremely volatile sector. But I do see the challenges being about moving towards being green. Certainly moving that way. Efficiency is always key. And I think the key to survival for a lot of businesses in our sector is being able to give value-added service. So 10, 15 years ago, just supplying plate was fine. These days, you've got to be doing more than that. You've got to be adding value. You've got to be giving the customer a solution rather than just supplying plate or raw products for them to work with. You've got to go much further down that value-added route, profiling, drilling, machining, chamfering, whatever your customer wants. You've got to be working the way down there, and that's the way the industry's going. So that requires continued investment, vision, and it is hard work, but the challenges are always going to be there.
Absolutely, and I know another key challenge you faced there is one of recruitment, and it's fair to say that perhaps that especially for a new generation, they don't in the forefront of their minds that a career in the sector isn't perhaps there, and that must be a challenge in terms of that initial recruitment. But I know not only have you combated this with an apprenticeship scheme, which is obviously key to ensuring that in 20 years' time there's still going to be the people with the right skill set in the industry. How's that gone, and how do you find recruitment more generally there, Tony?
Well, again, a lot of people in the industry talk about the skills gap. They talk about the demographic. They talk about lots of people in the steel industry being 40 upwards. And we can either just carry on talking about it or we can do something about it. What we've done at Brown McFarlane, so we've started an apprenticeship scheme. We're looking to bring our own people through. And that is people in all different areas of the business, in finance, in production, in sales, in maintenance. So we've started to bring young people generally through the business, ensuring that they continue with their education, but that we also give them mentoring on the job training and the support, and hopefully we'll get loyalty from these people as we bring them through the business and train them. And it's been successful so far. We've managed to bring people through that apprenticeship scheme. They're now in substantive roles. They come in, they bring some energy, they bring some enthusiasm to the business, and it's been a real positive.
Fantastic. And I think everybody wishes you all the best with that scheme going forward. It's difficult to underestimate how important something like that is for the future of not just Brown McFarlane, but for the sector as well, and indeed how the country can remain competitive in that respect. Now, none of us have been brave enough to bring it up just yet, but I'm afraid, Jenny, I'm going to say the B word, and we said if we didn't, Brexit is looming like a unwanted dark cloud over the horizon still.
Yep.
We speak in the midst of a general election. So there's everybody's Christmas ruined, I suppose. But it does mean that we're in a little bit of limbo here. How have you found, and I don't want to put words in your mouth here, Tony, but I think most people we speak to, whether they voted 3 years ago to leave or remain in the European Union, there's just a general sense of frustration that 3.5 years later, that especially for business, there is absolutely no certainty as to what's going to happen in the next 6 months. Have you found that? If you have, how's it affected the business, and what are your hopes for it moving forward?
I share everybody's frustration in terms of the indecision of our politicians. But But we can we can sit on our hands and we can complain about it,
yes,
or we can get on with it.
yes.
I think business leaders can't wait for politicians to make their mind up.
Quite right.
And decide whether they're going to invest or not invest. We've decided that we're going to carry on and invest in our business and invest in the future. Brexit or no Brexit, soft Brexit, hard Brexit, whatever the outcome is, we're still going to have an improved business. We're going to improve the infrastructure of our site. We're going to have a brand new laser machine, which gives us a USP in the market. I'm not going to wait for Brexit or wait for some politician to say this is the way we're going. We're just going to get on with it and make sure that we're in the best possible place, whatever the outcome.
It's quite right too, because when this is sorted, and I'm an optimist, perhaps, Tony. I'm maybe a fool, I don't know, but I am convinced that within 3 months there will be a pretty firm conclusion on this issue, given where the polls and everything stand at the moment. And I think we know what the most likely outcome is, and that when that does occur and other businesses begin to reinvest, you'll already have quite the gap between them and you, because you've already done that. So I think it's absolutely the right attitude to take. It's telling, isn't it, that while there is one could describe a bit of a political mess in the country, there is not an economic mess or a business mess. You're quite right in that businessmen up and down the country, businessmen and women, have got on with it as best they can, and they shouldn't let what happens in Whitehall try and slow them down.
Absolutely. I think once there is an outcome, I'm hoping that will give the country a boost. There should be some major projects released, more spending,
certainly,
and that should be another kickstart for the economy. Well, I just want to make sure that Brown McFarlane are in the best position to take advantage of that.
I've got no doubt that when that happens, your laser machine is going to be quite busy come February. But perhaps let's look at the parties more carefully, though. Do you have any? If you have a sort of a wish list of goodies, is there anything you'd quite like to see in either the Tory or Labour manifestos regarding policy for the sector for the next 5 years?
Well, I don't think the sector's waiting necessarily for that. I mean, we touched on British Steel earlier. I do think that the country is better off with a steel industry. So I think some of the action taken there on the trying to protect some of the jobs, I think is right. But we should only be protecting jobs if we're convinced that we're competitive and we're efficient and we're doing all of the right things. So certainly, yes, there should be some form of steel industry in the UK.
I think the steel industry also is a unique case. I know maybe this is a bit outdated, but certainly from the 80s onwards, you'd either be in one camp of pro-nationalised industries or the other camp of private industry. But I think even those who are or were some of the keenest, we'll call them Thatcherites at the time, would admit that when it comes to steel, there was this very, very strong case from a national security point of view to ensuring that the country has the ability to make cut and steel. Yeah,
I think there's two sort of disadvantages that the steel industry in the UK faces, and that's the high energy costs and business rates. If there could be some support from government on that, then I think outside of that, the industries need to stand on their own 2 feet and be competitive in their own right.
Well, I think let's look out for those business rate cuts in the manifestos. I think there'll at least be one party with that in, but we'll see about the other one. I won't name the names. Yeah. Now, looking towards the future, though, it clearly Brown McFarlane is in an exceptionally strong position going forward. What are your hopes for the next 18 months or so?
Well, in the next 18 months, obviously we've gone through a recent investment. We're just coming towards the end of that investment now. So obviously we want to realise the returns on that investment and grow our business. But also, I'm sort of mindful of the fact that we're in our business in Stoke-on-Trent. There's a finite capacity. So I think beyond this investment, we probably look at going further down the value-added route, potential acquisition, to complement the services that we offer.
So, well, look, I think I'm conscious of this time here. Tony, I wish you all the best for those months ahead, and let us hope that whatever happens politically in the next couple of weeks, it means you have a very busy order book going forward, and I hope come the new year we can chat again more, Tony, because I think it's going to be an exciting few months for the business, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Exciting, challenging time, but one we're looking forward to.
Tony, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for your time. Cheers.
I hope you all enjoyed our chat with Tony, and especially learning more about the challenges facing the sector and how the whole team at Brown McFarlane are continuing to raise standards. If you haven't heard it before, coming up now is our conversation with the Parliamentary Review's co-chairman, Eric Pickles. Lord Pickles served as Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government in David Cameron's cabinet before receiving a peerage in 2018. Lord Pickles remains active as the United Kingdom's anti-corruption champion and the country's special envoy for post-Holocaust issues, as well as being a keen vexillologist. That's flags to you and me. I hope you enjoy listening as much as I enjoyed speaking to Eric. Here it is now. Eric, thank you very much for joining us today.
Pleasure.
Now, I'm sure you won't mind me reminding the listeners that you've been involved in politics, both local and national, for quite a number of decades. Indeed, before the days we were in the common market. Given your experience over those years, what thoughts have you had over the last few weeks and months about the current political situation the country finds itself in?
Situation is quite dire because we have a parliament that is by and large useless. It's like a bored teenager on a long drive, and it knows what it doesn't want, and it's so bored with Brexit, but it can't agree. So no matter what you put up, it's against it. Are you in favour of a referendum? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of remaining within the single market? No, I don't want that. Are you in favour of... No, I don't want to do that. No. And are you in favour of leaving without a deal? No, we don't want to do that. So it's against everything, but there isn't enough votes to be in favour of something. And it could be by the time this podcast goes out that Boris has started on the process of the bill, because we'll be voting on that today. But even then, what people don't seem to understand, this is not the end of Brexit.
Right.
This is barely opening the door of Brexit. We've got years of negotiations about trade agreements, relationships with Europe, putting down pieces of legislation. We get our agriculture, our fisheries, our financial services into place. Brexit is going to go on and on and on and on. I'm sure we are.
Now, the question is, I should actually remind listeners that we are talking on the day that the second reading of the European Control Act will take place. So, as we speak, we don't quite know. As, well, perhaps like the government front bench, don't know what's going to happen. You compare Parliament to a petulant teenager. What do you do to a petulant teenager to sort it out? Is there a chance that it will see sense and push this through this bill without making amendments? Is there a chance it will vote for its own for a general election? How do you see this playing out at the moment?
The sensible thing will be to put this deal through, because I've always been of the view a deal is better than no deal, because this is just the beginning. In order to start the process of Brexit, start the process of the United Kingdom taking over powers that it's not really exercised for 40-odd years, the smart thing is to get this thing through now. But in a way, it's not about Brexit itself. If there was a free vote, this deal would have gone through. Mrs May's deal would have gone through. But it's about politics. It's about a Labour Party that thinks it has a chance, trying to make the Prime Minister, whether it was Theresa May or Boris Johnson, look as though that they are in office but not in power, of delaying as long as possible. There's a lot of talk about an election in the autumn, maybe back end of November, beginning of December, something for us to look forward to before Christmas. It's beginning to look less likely. It's beginning to look as though they might want to drag it into spring to get as far away as possible from the rather decisive moment that Boris came back with a deal. We have to remind ourselves that nobody thought he could deliver a deal, and it does quite shock them. And if you remember, all this process went through in order to ensure that we were left without a deal. When we have a deal, it's suddenly, oh no, it's not that kind of deal. We don't want that kind of deal. We want something different.
I think the vast majority of people in this country, whether Remain or Leave, now would be very satisfied for this to come to a amiable conclusion. And as you correctly just said, because when it does come to those in the opposition that claim to want this to end, and then introduce wrecking amendments, they introduce new objections to it, the general public are getting quite frustrated.
But you've got to understand that quite a lot of people don't get beyond a small area within Westminster, sometimes cliche referred to as the Westminster bubble, and go back to their own patch. Now, by and large, everybody hates their MP, except when they're at home, doing the fairs, wandering around, helping people. So they, in a way, they're cosseted to that great, which I feel is coming as a tsunami of change.
You were, of course, MP for Brentwood for
25 years.
Absolutely. What would you? I mean, of course, you resident there as well, despite being a proud Yorkshirean, obviously representing a good Essex seat. What would you say to your old constituents right now? You hang in there; it'll be all right.
Well, it's different when you're a member of Parliament because you've got to kind of toe the government line a little bit. So one thing I've found now is I've got my weekend back and I say what I want, and I think I always say to our constituents is that it is pretty hopeless down there.
Excellent. Well, on that, I think, honest assessment, it's something I think the Parliamentary Review has always done quite well, talking frankly about problems, issues, and also not just good practice, but leadership. Well, I always used
to read it when I was a member of Parliament, because, what you want more than anything is you want to meet people with different experiences, and I've always sort of found it quite a kind of a chatty magazine, but also you would see things that you would not automatically have come across. I certainly have attended the receptions over the year, and it's amazing the things you kind of pick up.
And I think it's important to stress it's not because politicians are uninterested, because honestly, as you'll know more than anyone, it's an issue of time. And to be able to have a channel and a platform where you can keep communication lines between businesses, schools and policymakers is so exceptionally important.
No, I think so, and it's important that it's beholden to nobody. People, pay to be part of the publication, pay to be members, and it's a way of not being beholden to government, not beholden to anything.
Now, echoing the words, of course, your fellow Chairman Lord Blunkett has said, what some might not know is that you started your political journey perhaps even further left than David Blunkett.
Oh, absolutely, I was a communist.
Now, what was it?
At the age of 14, I was bought the Trotsky's History of the Russian Revolution, and I read it from cover to cover. I tried to read it a few years back, and I just couldn't follow anything.
Oh, so I was going to say perhaps you might know the minds of the show front bench better than they do themselves.
From my position when I first joined, I would regard them as recalcitrant running dogs of the capitalist system.
Now, what was it then that moved you from radical Marxist to running the only in a city council controlled by the Conservatives in the 80s?
Well, I was very young, and I was fascinated by what was happening in what was then Czechoslovakia and Dubček, and the revolution that was taking place there inside communism, and the way in which he was repressed by Mr. Brezhnev, and the tanks and taking over. I was so angry. And I'm 16, remember. I'm really angry. And I thought, what's the most outrageous thing I can do? I'll join the Conservative Party as a protest. And I kind of sticked around, and my family thought it was the funniest thing that ever happened to us. I was Eric the Tory. And
I think you announced this quite grandly as a grand protest.
I did indeed, but do you know, I kept going down, and it was an exciting time. People were developing the ideas of what the Conservative Party should be. Selsdon man, even Heath looked radical. We had different ideas, and it eventually clicked. And at some point, I became a Conservative, and that was 51 years ago. I think I'm definitely 100% a Tory now.
Through and through.
Through and through.
Although I do know the story. Most people might guess that a dynamo Conservative like yourself would have perhaps a portrait of Mr. Thatcher or Mr. Churchill in their office. But who is it that you have?
I had Che Guevara. I always had him over my left shoulder of visitors, and they always used to you see their eyes going up and thinking, who? I can't possibly be it. Someone asked me if it was Desi Arnaz. I thought it was married to Lucille Ball. But no, the reason I did that was to remind me and to remind my officials that without constant vigilance, the cigar-chomping commies would take over.
I'm sure David Blunt was in the room to reply to that, actually. But in that long journey, you eventually ended up, of course, in 2010, doing something most Conservatives had never thought they would have to do, but in a coalition government with, of all people, the Liberal Democrats.
That's right.
Now, something I think perhaps today more than ever, people and our politics seems to be almost wholly determined on how we voted in a referendum 3 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, the most normal thing would happen after something like that would be the country would come together, and if anything, we're more divided. I mean, I thought working in the coalition, I'm proud to have been part of that coalition. I'm proud to have worked alongside the Liberal Democrats, who I think realise that, like all minority partners in a coalition, they would suffer at the polls.
Do you think we've lost the ability recently as a people to work with those that we might disagree with on issues more than we used to?
I'm not sure that's right. I mean, you can see various members of the Conservative Party working closely with Liberal Democrats and Labour to defeat their own government, but it's not a thing I think I would want to encourage.
Quite. And I should remind listeners, we are recording this in Victoria, just over the road at Cardinal Place, a fantastically new development site which wouldn't have been there without some of your legislation. What was the proudest?
I personally approved it.
Absolutely. What was the proudest moment, do you think, in serving Secretary for 5 years?
It's my actual proudest moment. We did a thing called Troubled Families, which was the first centre-right attempt to deal with poverty and to deal with difficult families that were causing a disproportionately large amount of call upon the state, and it was on the basis of tough love. It was on the basis of getting people into jobs. It was about dealing with the kind of the family as a whole, not just one or two individuals that were having a problem. And I'm pleased that it's continued.
And since, I should very much stress that since, of course, you're stepped down to being an MP, you do have your weekends back, but that's not to say you haven't remained very active and very busy. Of course, continues the government's anti-corruption champion, shone the harsh light of day over malpractice in the local government. Indeed, the Queen's speech we've just had includes some of your recommendations from 2016. I think a couple of things on that. First of all, are you surprised? I may imagine you may not be at some of the backlash towards in this country introducing voter ID for voting.
It is absurd, and it's particularly absurd coming from the Labour Party, because it was largely Labour's vulnerability that got my interest in trying to do something about it. And it's a bit like saying, you're requiring people to show some ID, that this is suppressing voting. It's a bit like saying that the post office is suppressing parcels because they demand to see some ID. I think they've got a bee into their bonnet that this is something like they got in the state to repress it. It's not. It's about giving confidence to the system. Now, the Electoral Commission and foreign observers have warned us for such a long time that our electoral system is vulnerable. And it's to misquote John Major, we are really sort of old maids cycling to evensong and Warburn. Yeah, I mean, it's such a basic thing. It's an important thing. And it was kind of interesting in some of the trials. They did a focus group with a bunch of young Asian girls. And they said they thought the process of a photo ID would actually give them a greater confidence in the fairness of the system. I make all kinds of recommendations to stop postal vote harvesting, to stop various fraud taking place, to stop intimidation at counts, to stop intimidation outside polling stations.
I think you referenced it earlier, the Westminster bubble. A lot of the places where this occurs and the places where this does go on are places where perhaps many members, many people in the press don't usually go to.
No, they don't. We saw a YouGov poll that said the overwhelming majority, well in the 60%, thought this idea was sensible.
Yeah, I imagine you're quite proud that recommendation is in the speech.
Yes, I mean, I'm a bit frustrated they didn't do it sooner, but nevertheless, I'm very happy that they are doing it.
It's as if the government's time has been taken up by something else and we've not focused on anything domestic.
Absolutely.
But with a man, though, with his roots in local government, do you think, and how much you've worked with that report, especially looking at them carefully, how would you rate our current state of local municipal politics?
Local government's very good. I mean, local government, don't get me wrong, it's by and large corruption-free, and it does a remarkably good job. And it was, in truth, my worries about local government and that these measures were brought in. I don't believe the fraud is big enough to be able to take a parliamentary seat, but it is big enough to take a council. And if you are negligent, uncaring about the probity of the poll, you're likely to be equally negligent about the awarding of contracts to your friends. So it's all past that. But local government is a very enduring part of our constitution. I got a bit of stick because we had to take some money from them, but by and large they survive very well.
Excellent. Now, beyond obviously that work, you also, of course, the British envoy for post-Holocaust issues.
Yeah, sure.
I think it very dear to your heart. I know you've done some fantastic work recently, including with obviously former Shadow Chancellor from the Review, Ed Balls. Would you mind, if you could just let listeners know what projects you are working on with that and really the importance that has to so many communities around the country?
Well, I used to be very unpleasant about Ed Ball, and he used to be very unpleasant about me. But I found working with him remarkably easy, and we've not had a single row in 2 years, and by now we're beginning to be able to finish each other's sentences. We're building a memorial to the Holocaust next to Parliament with a learning centre below it, and the reason why the Prime Minister chose that site is that it was David Cameron, and he wanted to ensure that when people left the memorial, they would look and see Parliament and recognise that it was the last bastion against tyranny. But more important, to remind people who work in Parliament that that the legislature has a choice. It can either protect its citizens or it can oppress its citizens. And we do know that that it was a compliant legislature that brought in the Nuremberg laws. And at a time when there are parts of Europe that are seeking to rewrite their history and seeking to see themselves as only the victims of the Nazis, I'm determined that we should tell the truth in an unblinking way. We are, I suppose, at a critical crossroads when the last survivor is likely to be no longer with us within the next decade and a half. And at that point, we do know that history starts to be reassessed. I think it was Simon Sharma that talked about this. And he was referring to the French Revolution. And of course, most of the books written in the 1850s are the ones that have shaped our view of the French Revolution. But the difference is this, that slightly over 100 years ago, my grandfather Edgar grabbed hold of his Lee Enfield and walked out of a trench in the Somme and walked towards the Germans. And within a few minutes, most of the people he'd been brought up with, most of his friends were dead. Nobody doubts that he did that. But there's a whole industry out there that doubts that the Holocaust took place. So that's why it's important that we help frame that narrative.
And you reference as well, it's so important, especially at this time of history, so many years afterwards, that young people in schools get the correct education about it. How do we compare as a country in doing that compared to some of our European friends?
We I think, compare remarkably well, and particularly because we've got a mixture of things. We ensure through the lessons of Auschwitz that 2 pupils from every secondary school go to Auschwitz each year, that they have a preliminary meeting, a visit and a wrap-up. We ensure that Holocaust Day is remembered in January. Now, I can remember starting that, or I'm not starting it, but being part of a foot soldier of people that put it together. And, it was like one man and a dog, but now it's quite a massive, it's a massive event. So I think we are quite good at remembering that. I think where we perhaps do need to have a wider understanding is beyond the death camps. And we need to kind of understand the Einsatzgruppen, which was the roving murder squads, how important they were. You were more likely to have been shot in a ditch than to end up in a death camp. The hinterland of that is Lithuania, where I was last week talking to colleagues, and through Belarus and the Ukraine. And it's really important that we ensure that we register where those death sites are.
And I think certainly, and I'm going to sit down next to speak, which hopefully won't be too long away. It's something I think we'd be very happy to keep updates on how that project is going, because it's so important and people do need to be aware of it. Looking to the future, though, I imagine you're actually very content and happy because the former Prime Minister, friend and colleague David Cameron just released his book, and you were quite unscathed from it.
I can't. He was very nice about it. I even bought the audio version because he was reading it, and he obviously, but there was a fair bit of affection, and I'm rather glad they left out one or two of the other embarrassing things.
Maybe another time.
Yeah.
But it's important, I think, and I'm conscious of the time. But I think it's important that today people have become so perhaps caught up in what's happening in this country regarding Brexit. Looking to the future, what would you say that it's a positive thing that this country has to look forward to?
Well, we're a large trading nation. We're a large economy. We're a liberal democracy, and it would be good to get through Brexit over the coming years. And it would be good to start to look at some of the social issues that we need to tackle. Those have been left behind by our economic progress, and it will be good to see some solid investment in this country, both in terms of its infrastructure but also in terms of the way it operates as a democracy.
And I know there's going to be a huge focus of the next review. Bob Pickles, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
As always, it's been a pleasure interviewing and learning from our guests. I hope you've all enjoyed listening. Until next time, I'm off to the Chew Chairman to raise a glass to raising standards. Goodbye.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. You can find every episode on iTunes, YouTube and Spotify. The views expressed by each guest in the podcast are their own. They do not represent the opinions of the Parliamentary Review, Westminster Publications, Lord Pickles, Lord Blunkett, David Curry or any other guest on the podcast. If you'd like to know more about the Parliamentary Review, please visit www.theparliamentaryreview.co.uk.